So today I would like to tell you a story, and it is the story of an Egyptian dancer and singer, a girl who lived about 10 centuries before our age, the start of our age. It means 3,000 years ago. Okay, that's the start. Now let me tell you how it came to my mind to tell you this story. It's a long story of a story. And it is about the fascination of history, which has many elements of fascination, but for me, the main fascination of history is how history changes. You, you know that history repeats itself, which is true in a certain way. There are kingdoms and battles and generals and leaders, and many things repeat or rhyme, as you prefer. But many things also change, big, big changes. And it is fabulous to think that some things didn't exist up until a certain point. Just to tell you, in our recent book, which is titled The Empty Sea, written with my colleague Ilaria, we try to look who had made the first image of a fish. Then it's easy to find, and you found it. Goes back to about 4,000 years ago. Somebody drew a fish for the first time in history. Why not? So if you start asking yourself this kind of question, you find a lot of food for thought. Wow, who thought first something? And I would like today to tell you about a very fundamental point. Who ever thought first about human names? I'm Ugo. You're listening to me. Your name I don't know, but you will be John, Andrew, Frank, or whatever. You have a name. Humans have this association of an individual and a name, which is something recent in the history of the world, the history of our planet. Not even the chimps, our close relatives, they don't use names. They do not associate individual with the sound. Now they, of course, they recognize each other, but they use different ways. They have ways in their mind. The mind of a chimp is very different than ours, and then because I see myself as Ugo, but a chimp sees himself or herself in a completely different way. So, first question: when did names arise? Very difficult to say. Probably our ancestors, partly ancestors, the Neanderthals. You know that the Neanderthals, we have some Neanderthal blood. If you are European, you have it at least. And they are our ancestors, at least in part. Did they have names? I would say so, probably. Why not? But then you go back in time, Homo erectus, Homo habilis. Did they use names? Who knows? And about the very remote time. At some moment, anyway, our ancestors found that it was useful to associate sound with a person, and also the evolution of language associating a sound to an object. Long story. But now, for us, it is impossible to tell the origins because we don't have the sounds. No way to know what language the Neanderthals spoke. We have to go to the time when people started writing. Then we can understand. Did they have names already? Probably, but there is a moment in history when you see the first written names. Yeah, there is such a moment, and we find a few graphemes which we can interpret as names already, so maybe 3,000 years before Christ, which means 5,000 years ago. And the first, if you like to know, is someone maybe whose name was Kushim, and who may have been somebody who dealt with barley, and he left to us, or somebody left to us, a clay tablet with the name and some record of a transaction in barley. Then there are others who have moved things and more, and And so this is very interesting. And see, I would like to go one step forward. Then with names, once you have names, you can tell stories. Because if you don't have names, how do you tell a story? I say, no way you cannot have characters in a novel to move and interact without names. So there is a moment in which people start telling stories to each other, and there are all sorts of stories, and probably the first kind was the epic story. Epic story is very old. We have extremely old stories. Um, I think the Iliad, the Odyssey, or the story, the saga of Gilgamesh, probably the oldest of all Sumerian saga. And but there is, I would also like to note there are two kinds of story, many kinds, but two main ones. One is epic stories. One is novels. Novels, it's two different levels, completely different um, elements of fiction. Epic is something that has to do with a hero. This usually has a name, but it doesn't matter because you could say this story is about a hero and say hero all the time, and you would not need to know the name of the hero. Just Gilgamesh. Maybe it wasn't a name, but was a title. And like for us, where you think of Marvel Comics, the hero, the heroes of the Marvel Comics, very often they have a secret name, but they are identified with with the physical characteristics, like Spider-Man. Now, it's not his name; it's what he looks like. But if you're talking about novels, you are talking about people, ordinary people who do ordinary things, face difficulty, may behave in ways which are very brave, very special, heroic, but the novel has to do with people who have a name and who behave more or less normally. So this I told you in a previous clip about this story. We have this use of writing novels and reading novels. It's part of our civilization, but novels are not so common. A lot of civilization left us epic stories, but not so many novels. And so the question is, back from names, and then having names, who was the first who wrote or told a novel, a story of ordinary people? And that's an interesting question, very interesting. You have to go navigate through the world's literature to find people who told or described ordinary people. Like not so often, it's relatively recent, and it's a long story of a story that you could spend time to discuss. But let me tell you at this point an idea that I have, and that the first novel in history may have been written in Egypt about 10 century, 10 centuries before Christ, or 11 maybe. And it is the story of a man called Wenamon, who was, he tells us, he writes in the first person, he was the priest of the temple of Thebes, and he went to Byblos in Lebanon. To the stories about this travel, where he gets to uh, buy some timber to build a ceremonial boat for the temple. It has some elements of an epic story, but it is the way it is written is not. It's not the epic stories. When Ammon, you will see, is not a hero. It's an ordinary person. He's an anti-hero. And we don't know if this story was true or not. We have different opinions. Surely it has been changed and embellished a little because there are some characteristics of fiction. But I think, and many people think too, that there is a factual basis. What this Wenamon describes, it's a real story, things that happened, probably. And it is here that we find the name of this dancing girl, Tanetnot. One moment, we will get to that. Let me tell you a little of this story because very well written. It's a different kind of writing, not like our modern fiction. It is very compact, but you see that it is written in the way that the idea is probably also to entertain the reader or the listener or whatever. So, quickly, what Ammon must do was go to Byblos, was far away from Egypt, get this timber, bring it back, an adventure. So he goes, gets a boat. While he gets a boat, he has to have some gold to buy this timber. He will not get it for free. So while he's building the boat, negotiating, he's robbed by somebody who takes the gold away. So he's in trouble, tries to get more gold. Anyway, he decides to go anyways, sails toward Lebanon, and in the trip he finds another boat going by, a ship, and he decides, wow, good idea, let's turn pirates, and he attacks the ship and gets some silver, not so much silver, of course, but he thinks it may be enough. But was not a good idea. So he goes to Byblos, arrives there, he finds another guy there, the big man, the local big man, somebody who's named Zakarbal. Probably a name has to do with the local religion, and they start negotiating because, you came here with just, Mr. Wunamon, you came here with just 30 debens of silver. You want to buy timber with so little. I said, no, but it's not a question of how much money I'm bringing. It's because you have to do this for the sake of the power of the god Ammon that I'm taking with me as a sort of idol in the boat. And so they quarrel, they fence literally. They know each other. They know what they're doing. Essentially, you have this dialogue of people who try to cheat each other. Like, but still today in Lebanon, you have this kind of dialogue when you want to buy something. Anyway, Panamon is in trouble because he doesn't have enough money, and Zakarbal doesn't want to give him this timber for so little. So he tries to get some money back from Egypt, ship it to him from Egypt, and in the meantime keeps negotiating, and things nothing happens. At some moment, the ships of the friends of the people he had robbed before, they appear on the horizon in front of Byblos, and they start navigating like this and waiting for when Ammon. Say, as soon as this guy comes out of the harbor, we jump on him and we cut him in very tiny slices or something like that. And so there is a very bad moment for Wenamon, and we have this moment. It has to. It's part of fiction, this, because you have a moment of difficulty of the hero. The hero is in trouble. He seems to be in a hopeless situation. Then things must change, and at this point we have this scene with Wenamon who cries. He sits on the beach and cries, and at this point the big man Zakarbal gets worried. They say, this guy will commit suicide. If he does that, the deal is ruined. So he said, let me cheer him up. And he sends to Wenamon one ram and this Egyptian singing and dancing girl. And here is what we know the name of this girl, Tanetnot, more or less. And you see, this is a special capability to know. We know of a dinner that an Egyptian priest had with an Egyptian girl who was in Byblos for some reason. One night, what they ate for dinner, because they had, of course, roasted ram, and it's fantastic that 3,000 years afterwards we know this detail of history. And also this is part of the fiction. There has to be a moment with some romance, some sex. Also, it's normal. It doesn't say anything about. We have no idea what this girl looked like, but it is at least likely that she did more than just dancing and singing. That's normal. I mean, it's the way. And it reminds you James Bond. You know, James Bond is always fighting against all sorts of problems. And then we have some interludes where we are romantic adventure. And I think of Casino Royale when he has dinner with the lady called Vesper, and we don't just know the dinner, the names. We know what they had for dinner. They had caviar, and what kind of cocktail James Bond ordered, which is today still called a Vesper. And see, this is part of the fictional universe. The hero was the simple, because Wanamon is not a hero. Clearly he's an ordinary man, struggles as he can, and he has this moment of relax. And then the story goes on, and he managed to evade the enemies, ends up in Cyprus, meets the Queen of Cyprus, and finish, because story is the papyrus is broken there. We don't know what happened. Surely he must have been able to go back to Egypt, otherwise we would not have the story. But anyway, we have most of the story. It's we know how it works, how it worked, and and so you see, you have this beautiful story of an age, a remote age, written with a lot of irony, and with this really very well made this duel between the local chief and the big priest, who try to find an agreement without losing their dignity. And also you have this curious detail about this girl, and we don't know anything. We will never know more about her over, in addition to this detail, the name that appears on this papyrus. It's it's what the way things are with history, but it is still strange that we know this little piece, little chunk of history. And I can tell you that I have been to Byblos in Lebanon. There are no more. The trees, the cedar trees have been all cut. Criminals, let's not say anything about that. But I was in Byblos, and I remember that I sat on the beach some moment, not really the beach, but anyway, on the sea, on this waterfront, in front of the sea, and this story came to my mind, and it was very curious to think that maybe 3,000 years before, just in that place where I was sitting, maybe was this scene of a romantic dinner of someone who came from Egypt, who had some dinner there with maybe some the sun setting or things like that. And that's it. And that's how history goes, moves. Sometimes it leaves traces of us. Sometimes we go away without leaving any traces. So we don't know. Yeah, probably not. It's very unlikely that in 3,000 years somebody will remember me or you or any one of those I know or you know. But it is a curious glitch of history, and that's one of the things that make history so fascinating. And so I told you the story of the Egyptian dancer Tanetnot. Let me show you. I leave to you to imagine how she could have been, and maybe I can show you an image of an Egyptian dancer. This lady, yeah, you see. Egyptians had some very formal art, but they also could show a woman dancing, beautiful woman dancing. You see in this position, very clearly dancing, and also the way they dressed. We have some dancers who were not so much dressed when you had girls dancing. So I leave to you to imagine that, and thank you for your attention.